This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Hello there. It is the first week of August, which means the deranged and Halloween obsessed amongst us are doing everything in our power not to go a little overboard too fast. To prevent myself from going all out into spooky season and fall content too soon, it has become tradition for the first video in August to be a seasonally appropriate witch-themed character design video. This hasn't even been on purpose. It's more like an act of restraint that I've made myself do every single year. I really am this predictable. 2 years ago, August 12th. Last year, August 6th. Last year, it was flowers. The year before that, moths. But this August, I thought that I would turn witches into the most seasonally appropriate thing of all. Seasons. I've been suggested the seasons prompt many times. It's another one of those prompts that I've been suggested so much where I don't know why I haven't done it already. I think I got suggested it again just the other day, actually. So let's finally do it. So today, I am going to be turning the 4 seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter, into witch-themed character designs. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. And as usual, I'm going to begin this video by doing a little bit of research and building up some inspo boards to try to nail down exactly what flavor of witch character I want to do for these guys. I've designed a lot of witch characters on the channel, so I am trying to make these characters feel unique and distinct from those, and even last year whenever I made my witch flowers video, those characters even bordered on having a seasonal theme to them, so I definitely want these characters to feel distinct from those. For these witches, I really want to lean into the tone and the weather of each season, the foliage and plants associated with them. I think really emphasizing the foliage and the different flowers and plants and vines and trees that are growing and thriving in each season is going to be really important. The color palettes, of course. This time around, I want to get more thematic and almost elemental. I really want to lean into the tone of the weather of each season and, of course, the temperature. I tend to give all of my witch characters super on-the-nose witch hats, so that's going to be an important piece of each design. And I've also taken to giving most of my witch characters these extremely silly witch staff / broom hybrids. Listen, yes, they're very silly, but they have become kind of a staple of my witch character designs. So I have taken great care to associate each of these with a unique kind of seasonal tree and lantern that matches the season's vibe. So you know the drill for all of these videos. The first order of business is always to do some thumbnails and concept art to figure out what the heck I am doing visually, so let's get on that. So first I took to my crappy sketchbook and started scribbling a bunch of random stuff. I knew distinctive silhouettes would be pretty important for nailing the particular vibe of each season, so I started by scribbling some thumbnails for the general silhouettes as well as the witch hats, since I had some ideas for making those pretty visually distinct. While I was at it, I also did some rough thumbnails of the characters' faces and general profile, because I feel like that's a first step for me for nailing down a character's personality. This also allows me to start bringing some shape language into the design of the face and some of those details that I probably wouldn't focus on until later on otherwise. At this point, since these characters are witches, I decided I also wanted to associate each of them with an animal to be their little sidekick familiar. And for those, I decided on a deer fawn for spring, a giant toad for summer, a raven for fall, and a big white wolf for winter. What can I say? I've been reading through a Game of Thrones. During this stage, I also like to do some general broad thematic character work, hence the scribbling that is happening in my sketchbook to kind of just like figure out character dynamics and alignments. And this even seeps its way into the general costume design that I do, because since this is so heavily reliant on like seasons and temperature, I wanted to associate each character with a specific range of textiles. So spring is associated with cotton, chiffon, organza, tulle, denim, and rainwear. Summer is associated with crochet and linen, translucent fabrics, and silk. Fall is associated with suede, leather, velvet, corduroy, and tweed. And winter is of course associated with furs, thick wool, flannel, and fleece. And once my Pinterest boards were built and I laid all of that groundwork in my crappy sketchbook, I finally went in on my iPad and started experimenting with some colored thumbnails, just trying to nail down general outfits and visual design. Of course, as always, trying to make sure the colors are harmonious and trying to kind of like carry over bits of the prior color palette from one season to the next to keep those themes going. But whenever these characters are actually fully done, I'm going to show them off in my portfolio, which is hosted by this video sponsor, Squarespace. With the busy schedule of being a self-employed artist, anything that takes a significant amount of extra time is stressful, so I love that Squarespace really streamlines everything without compromising on the quality. Not only can you whip up the base for your portfolio or website in just about an hour using their flexible website templates that offer fully customizable text, colors, website pages, and so much more, whenever you're ready to actually upload your portfolio pieces to your gallery, you can basically do it with a click of a button, which has not always been the case with website builders that I've used. And whenever I want to update my website, it's incredibly easy to add new pieces all I have to do is select them from my computer, click upload, and automatic image scaling will do the rest by sizing them and positioning them in an appealing way in my gallery. But if I'd like to highlight a project even more, I can even create mini portfolios dedicated to a particular project, like this one that focuses on my recent fake werewolf dating sim video, which only took me about 15 minutes to make. Finally, such detailed views of your work will no doubt stir up feelings of purchases in your viewers. And for that, you can host an online store right alongside your website, where Squarespace offers all the tools you need to sell your artwork yourself, or you can opt to use a print-on-demand service with Squarespace's custom merch. And with new flexible payment options like credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay, or the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay, purchasing has never been more accessible for your customers. So if you'd like to highlight your artwork and your wares, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/PricklyAlpaca to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it.
So going in the typical year order of the 4 seasons, first up we have spring. So spring is of course associated with flowers blooming, the world kind of coming back to life after the death of winter time. So greenery finally growing back, kind of mild temperatures that are warming up but with a bit of a chill still in the air. Also lots of rain. Here where I live, it basically rains for months on months and then gets very hot very quickly. To get a little bit more conceptual, something else that I want to bring into these character designs is the idea of the life and death cycle, or like the sleeping and wakefulness cycle of nature, to get a little bit less morbid with it. So in line with that, spring is the season of rebirth, regrowth. It makes me think of tiny cute animals, and so for the general personality and vibes, it makes me think of very youthful, maybe naive but still optimistic character. So that's kind of the general vibes that I want to go for this character design, which is a lot to pack into one character, but we're gonna try our best today. So to zoom out just a little bit, my overall lore idea for these characters, because I like putting my characters in context and giving them a story, and specifically with my witch and wizard characters, I like to give them kind of like a stewardship over something. They're sort of guardian figures meant to maintain balance and that sort of thing. So my idea for these characters is that once in a generation, a new witch is born to a corresponding season. It's like the Avatar cycle, but for the seasons. And it's sort of their job to keep track of things, maintain order between like the temperature and the seasons and all of the vibes. And in particular, like they're meant to maintain order and balance between each other, because the cycle of the seasons is very important to like ecosystems in the world at large. And since these characters would be archetypes that are kind of keepers of that season, the balance with that season is as much about the external world as it is the internal world within themselves and within their relationships to each other. So it's like very much a sisterhood of girls who have very contradicting personalities, because obviously not one season is quite like another, and they all have to keep the peace amongst each other and get along. So I think these characters would very much play on the trope of like your emotions being connected to your magic and its effects on the world. So if there's conflict within the group or things are not harmonious, there will end up being effects in the real world because of that, which yes is like a disproportionate amount of power and responsibility, but it's a fantasy. That's the point. I think it would also be fun if the group was kind of primed for that type of conflict, because if you are like the steward of a particular season, I imagine that you might have the opinion that that season is the best season. And in terms of like bringing about each season, I'm gonna say the word season too many times in this video, that could cause problems if one of the girls is trying to bring about that season too quickly or too early, or make it stick around too long. Like summer perhaps bringing about a long summer that is ridiculously hot and unbearable, or maybe winter bringing about a season of cold and hibernation where things cannot grow for an extended period of time. We can't have that. And I think that bias for their corresponding season would come from their power and magic being the most powerful whenever it is their season and they have like dominance and control. They are personally like the most comfortable, they feel the most like themselves, so whenever they have to kind of like pass the baton to the next season, it feels like a personal sacrifice for a little while, even though it is like the best thing for the overall realm. So whenever things are not harmonious, all the other seasons besides the dominant ones suffer, but I think whenever things are harmonious, as a consequence, they all become more powerful in like a more even, balanced best way. So in terms of Spring's actual character design, and pretty much all of these, I sort of did go a bit overboard on detail, but I want you to sit for a moment and ask yourself, what are you here for, if not for me to go overboard on the detail? Much like Radagast the Brown, my main idea for these characters was sort of for them to have like the foliage and the plants associated with each season, or like lack thereof, kind of growing off of them and adorning their person. So since spring is the season of blooming and regrowth, I had to add a bunch of like little cherry blossoms and just blossoms in general coming off of her. I wanted to give her one of those like really big, cute, floral looking hats. So I gave her one of those, but gave it more of like a witchy twist with a bunch of little cherry blossoms and blossoms growing off of it. I gave her a matching witch staff, kind of based off of the shape and general color of a cherry blossom tree, again with lots of blossoms and general springtime foliage kind of wrapping around it and growing off of it. It took me a while to decide what kind of lantern to give her at the top of this, as kind of like the light and source of her power. This is something that I do for most of my witch characters, and the lanterns also do double as like a witch's broomstick, so they can fly around on it. It's silly, but it's just something I started doing and I haven't stopped. But eventually I settled on giving her kind of like a glowing beehive at the top. I don't know exactly how that works, but I thought it would be seasonally appropriate and cool. And in my mind, that overrides practicality. Speaking of seasonal appropriateness, something else that I wanted to bring into this character design, like I've mentioned multiple times, is rain and clouds and kind of like overcast springtime vibes, because that is what I in particular am used to. So for her main clothing garment, I wanted to give her sort of like a silky inspired dress, at least with like the cut being more of like a baby doll dress, but this time with like a more youthful, sweet Peter Pan collar at the top, and then kind of cascading into lots and lots of poofs at the bottom that sort of look like rain clouds. I also styled her hairstyle after rain clouds, just like white poofy twin buns. I thought would be really cute and match the skirt really well. Since this is a springtime outfit, I wanted it to be halfway built for kind of chilly rainy weather and halfway built for slightly warm sunny weather. So in addition to the skirt, I gave her some pink knee-length socks with some yellow Mary Janes. I gave her some green gloves because hey, maybe it's like kind of nasty and wet outside, or maybe she's doing a little bit of gardening. And to match that idea, someone on my Patreon also said like the legs looked a little bit bare in the design, so they recommended some kind of like holster on her leg, and I agreed, so I gave her also a little holster with little vials that could contain seeds or little flowers to plant since it's springtime. And finally, to fully prepare her for whatever weather is coming her way, I gave her a little translucent rain poncho situation, complete with some floral patches and some yellow trim. It's vaguely inspired by a jacket that I saw on Pinterest. I just thought it was really cute, and I nearly forgot, also vaguely inspired by something that I saw on Pinterest. I decided to add some like dangling rain inspired beads to the bottom of her like cloud skirt, just to give the effects of like rain coming down. I feel like this may have been like a little bit too much busyness for the overall character design, but I also think that it's kind of cute. I don't know. I couldn't decide, so I left it in. And finally, to round out the design, I had some trouble deliberating over what kind of familiar to give her, but in the end, like I said earlier, I decided on a little deer fawn. And this might be one of the worst animals that I have ever drawn. I'm looking at the finished version now and it looks like a dog. So I hope you like her vaguely deer looking dog. I think in theory this idea is really cute, but I need to work on my deer a little bit. And finally, in terms of personality, I feel like this character is very curious and optimistic, very positive, maybe like a little bit naive. As the springtime character, I feel like she's really obsessed with growth and maybe even like personal growth. She's like always positive about everything, to the point where like it's maybe a little bit toxically positive. I think she also has a tendency to overwater things, both literally and metaphorically. So yeah, obviously I feel like she would have the most in common with summer in terms of the dynamics, and have the least in common with fall and winter. Her arc in this theoretical story that doesn't exist and never will exist would definitely be about trying to find common ground with those two. Next up, we have my girl Summer, and this illustration was so very fun to work on. I think partially because right now where I am, it is the summer season, so these are just the general vibes that I'm feeling, but I also really got to let loose my maximalism gene whenever I was working on this one, and frankly all of these, but like especially this one. So where I live, in the southeastern United States, States, in the Northern Hemisphere. The summers for me are very hot and very, very humid. Swampy and moist are both words that come to mind whenever I'm thinking about it. I also live in a very rural area with a lot of like trees and woods and forest, so overgrowth, wildflowers, kudzu are also things that I very much associate with the summertime. Bugs, frogs, critters, wildlife, they're just everywhere. I think it's also generally associated with a feeling of fun and doing a lot of like outdoor activities together in community and in groups. Summer vacations are also a big thing, so sort of slowing it down, relaxing and taking it easy before everything ramps up towards the end of the year. And also with my life and death cycle analogy, if spring is sort of like rebirth and regrowth, I would associate summer the most with like life and just living. So given all of these things, I want summer to be kind of like a fun-loving, carefree, sort of laid-back character, someone who just enjoys living and lounging and enjoying the nature, and someone who has that bubbly, upbeat, positive personality that spring kind of has, but in a more relaxed, laid-back way. So for her character design itself, I wanted to go for the most summery summer vibes. And what spells summer more than a very large sun hat and a sundress kind of mixed with a bathing suit situation? That's sort of what I ended up going with for her. I have seen so many really cute sun hat inspired witch hats on Pinterest, so that's kind of what inspired hers, only I made it extra big because sometimes you do want to be keeping the sun off of your face. For the aforementioned sundress, I got very inspired by a lot of the like fairy core style garments that I was seeing on Pinterest, so I kind of concocted a mixture between a sundress and a swimsuit, one that's kind of made of lightweight green flowy fabrics, almost resembling seaweed or algae or something like that. Definitely something where she could just like pop in the water for a little swim and then come out of it and dry off really easily. To accessorize that, I gave her a little leather corset belt to bring in some woodland vibes. I gave her some leaf-themed bracers with some mushrooms on them, some little gold cuffs on her arm, some little leaf-themed fairy shoes that lace all the way up her legs, and also some little sunburst earrings. I thought that was appropriate, and I also wanted to add sun motifs in a couple of other places. So to add a little bit more detail, I added some sunburst and star motifs going down the center front of the dress, and also for the buckles on the shoes. For the staff, I was once again very inspired by the fairy core community. I see giant like flower fixtures for lights and lanterns all the time, kind of to make yourself feel like a tiny little fairy, because it's like, oh, this giant flower is my lamp now. So I did something similar for her staff. Once again, the light source and magical source of her power kind of coming from the inside of this flower bloom. And that is atop a piece of long twisted swamp or driftwood, and that is absolutely covered in weeds and wildflowers and vines, as is the rest of her entire design, like her hat and everything, because I found a new Clip Studio paintbrush this week and I kind of went wild with it for these character designs. Well, it's more of a brush setting, because if you go to any tool in Clip Studio Paint, I'm pretty sure, when it like lays down paint, if you go to the actual subtool settings, there's a checkbox that says watercolor edge that you can check and then kind of tweak, and this will basically create a little outline around every single paint stroke that you make. And it's such a satisfying way to draw in like little leaves and flowers and foliage and stuff like that, and make it look like you intricately made line art for all of it when you didn't do a single thing. It's a great art cheat I highly recommend, and as you can see, I used it way too much in the process of making all of these illustrations. So that's how I did all of the vines and foliage and wildflowers and kudzu coming off of the witch hat in this illustration. It was super fun to do. I kind of went wild, and I also used this trick to make a couple of rogue little white mushrooms, because I feel like that's also super important to any summer witch. You gotta have some fungus growing off of you. Finally, I had to make this character design even more endearing by adding a toad companion. I went through a couple of familiar ideas for summer as well, but eventually I felt like a frog was unique enough. It's something I hadn't done before, and it was also just like really cute with this already like very foresty, swampy character that I was working on. And by making this toad dog-sized, I feel like it brings a lot of whimsy to this entire character and piece. If I had even more room on my canvas to make it bigger, I definitely would have. And if this frog was not cute enough, I keep calling it a frog, but it's a toad, I also gave him a matching little witch hat and bow around his neck, because that is wholesome, and I'm just following every indulgence that I have with these characters right now. So looping back around to her personality, like I mentioned earlier, I think she's very like bubbly and fun-loving and laid back, like she really knows how to chill because she is a summer girl. But I also feel like this is the kind of character who would be a little bit rebellious and like tending to avoid responsibility, because summer is kind of the season of like savoring fun and trying to hold on to it before the responsibilities and the stress kicks in towards the end of the year. Even though she is laid back, I do think that she would have more of like a fiery personality whenever it comes to things that she is very opinionated about, because she is the summer, so she's associated with like heat in the sun and sort of like this boldness. So I do think she has a bit of rebellion and resistance whenever it comes to things that are important to her. I think she would also have a very extroverted, energetic personality, because in my little analogy between the life cycle of the seasons, I also mentioned like sleeping and wakefulness, so I wanted half of the characters, spring and summer, to have more of that like awake, alert, energetic energy, while the later seasons, fall and winter, have like a sleepier, calmer quality to them. So in terms of how summer relates to the group dynamics, of course she and spring are both just like balls of energy, gassing each other up, extroverts, the two of them, just endlessly bouncing off of each other, while the other two, fall and winter, are like introverts and they don't know where they are or what's going on. I think summer would also have a bit of like a role model or older sister dynamic with spring, because summer is kind of like spring but like a little bit older, a little bit more lived in. So I don't know, there might be some admiration there, even though they definitely rep their own seasons the most. In terms of friction, I think summer and fall would definitely butt heads a lot, because, you know, summer is kind of passing the baton to fall, and fall is sort of like destroying all of the splendor and beauty of the summertime, which obviously is going to bother summer. I feel like it would be fun if the two of them constantly butt heads like cats and dogs, like constantly bickering, messing with each other, trying to get a rise out of each other, just some like real palpable angry sibling energy. I think they really embody the way you hate your sibling that's like nothing like you, but you love them, but you also just hate them because you don't get them. I don't know, it's complicated. I think it's fun. They have a very like affectionate bullying going on between the two of them, or at least it becomes affectionate in time once they figure out their mess. As for summer and winter, I feel like at first they're such opposites that they don't even know how to begin comprehending each other, but I think a very real bond could develop in time with like the complementary opposite natures of the two of them. I think winter, being the eldest sister of the group in my mind, would serve as a really good mentor figure if summer could like calm down, listen, foster some of those traits that she neglects by being such a carefree summer girl. And I think in turn winter could lighten up and be a little less spooky. This is just me rattling off the top of my dome at 2 a.m., but I think that that's how harmony amongst the seasons is achieved, by them sort of sharing their strengths and nurturing and having this like exchange of knowledge and power. Like alone they are such extreme representatives of just that season and the associated traits, but together they are such a full example of this life cycle. Okay, this is starting to sound like a friendship is magic anime speech, and we're gonna move on. So next up we have fall, and fall is maybe tied with summer for my favorite season right now, and one of the reasons for that is that here those seasons are not all that different, honestly. Like fall here is still so hot until it isn't, but fall is more so one of my favorite seasons because of the surrounding holidays and overall spooky vibes. This character design is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this video in the first place, because it gave me the excuse to draw something slightly spooky and autumnal without going too far. Thank you for indulging me. I know I'm terrible. So the fall is of course associated with crunchy falling leaves, bare tree limbs, generally chilly temperatures, pumpkins and gourds, and harvesting crops. For me, of course, Halloween and spooky season, and also just general festivals and feasting. In the whole life cycle analogy, you have the stage of harvest, but then you also have like simultaneously a stage of decay and the world kind of like breaking down so that it can be born anew. So somewhat like spring, which is like rebirth. It's sort of like this transitory season where I see summer and winter as being like a little bit more static. So if spring is kind of the process of life, then fall is the process of death, or like going into this stage of sleeping and hibernation, which of course is one of the major reasons for the immaculate spooky vibes and general macabre. And I think that that's something that really begins to draw a hard line in the dynamics of this group and set this character and Winter's character apart from the prior two characters who are very like enthusiastic, extroverted, energetic, where we have this character whose season embodies a very, very important function, but does trend towards this like decay and revitalization of like the ground and soil that might not make a whole lot of sense to the prior two characters. So for fall, I wanted to make a character who's a little bit more quiet and macabre and bookish. I think she would also embody a sense of responsibility that would make her a really good foil to Summer. And I think in a big way, this character is sort of like a science nerd, sort of obsessed with the processes that nature is going through at this point, and also acting as a protector and a guide and an overseer for those processes. In terms of the design itself, this one was a bit tricky for me just because I was trying to capture and embody so much, like so many aesthetics are kind of happening at once for this character, and I kind of did try to force a little bit too much into this character design, but that's part of the challenge. I'm trying to balance a bunch of different things. I think I did nail down the general broad strokes of the silhouette whenever I was working on the thumbnails. I feel like whenever it comes to witchy garments, cloaks and capelets and pinafores and aprons and light flowy undergarment like dresses kind of embody the entire aesthetic. So I wanted each of these characters to kind of lean into one corner of that like witchy aesthetic spectrum, if that makes any sense. And for this character, I wanted to give her like capelet, apron, pinafore vibes, like the most immaculate autumn layers that you can imagine. Again, autumn is kind of still hot where I live, so I have to live vicariously through my non-existent character design so that I can actually have layers in my life. So taking that general outfit silhouette formula, I wanted to combine that with some autumnal leaf shapes. In my rough thumbnail, I kind of had a bit of an autumn leaf shape to it, but it was mostly just in the witch hat, and I was trying to bring that whole aesthetic into the rest of the garment, specifically into capelet and color piece itself. And I think that degree of maximalism is generally where I began girl bossing too close to the sun and kind of making everything a little bit too complicated, which as a consequence made it difficult to balance out all of the detail in this design. But listen, bear with me, this is a maximalist channel. I think we made it through in the end. So I ended up settling on, of course, giving her like an autumn inspired leaf witch hat. I basically made the brim of the witch hat the shape of a bunch of autumn leaves and gave it like this rich red lining color. And then up top, I gave it a very long pointy point, but with the end kind of flooped over with a little pine cone on the end of that. And something that I've been doing throughout the character designs is kind of making the tip of the witch hat like a little bit longer with each design, as if it's growing through the seasons or something like that. So at this point, the tip of the hat has gotten so long that it's begun flopping over. And I think that embodies the chaos that I kind of wanted to bring to this design, because I feel like the autumn season is kind of a visually chaotic season. There's so much like color and texture going on in the world. So I didn't want to make this outfit too clean or too monochromatic. So like I said, I carried that leaf shape from the hat down into the little capelet that she's got over her shoulders and kind of draping all the way down to her ankles. I gave it multiple tiers of those leaf shapes and also gave it a little matching long Peter Pan collar, again to add maybe a little too much texture. I added a little belted crimson apron under that, some green suede gloves with the matching green suede white trimmed circle skirt. I brought the yellow and orange trimmed stockings from the thumbnail illustration into the character design to keep her legs warm, and paired that with some lace up witchy ankle boots. Since I gave Summer's dress a lot of sun iconography, I wanted wanted to do the same with fall, but with stars and moons, because I also associate fall with that general like whimsy goth aesthetic. So I did kind of the same thing, but for her on her capelet with little moons and stars trimming the edges of that. I also gave her a little star as the buckle on her collar. And for her broom staff and lantern, I was kind of inspired by the aesthetic of the beast from Over the Garden Wall and the little lantern from that. So I gave her a similar oil camping lamp kind of draped off of a rickety, spooky tree branch that still has a couple of sprigs of autumn leaves coming off of it. And of course that goes down and collects into a little broom bottom with even more autumn foliage and leaves, little pine cones, acorns, and I of course added some little white mushrooms coming off of the staff and also on her witch hat as well. White mushrooms are also something that I gave to my summer girl, and that's another concept that I wanted to play with these character designs, kind of traits from each season passing to the next in subtle ways and having that level of consistency. And that's also something that I tried to bring into the color palette for all of the characters. Spring is very pastel, pink, green, blue, white, yellows, tans, and browns, and all of those colors kind of moved over to summer but intensified and got more saturated, especially whenever it comes to the blues and the pinks and greens. And I've kind of done the same thing with fall's color palette, but I've turned the hue of the pinks and magentas over to reds and oranges, and I've turned the hue of the blues and lilacs over to like a deeper purple color. I've also kept hints of that green color but made it more of an earthy olive green to blend in better with all of the fall tones. For fall's familiar, I was initially going to do red fox, but then I remembered that I did that for the witch character that I designed last year, so instead I decided to give her a raven, which I thought would be really fitting for this character design, because playing with the life and death theme, of course, ravens, crows, the representation is very Edgar Allan Poe. The symbolism of it all is very played out, but I just thought it was fitting. I also like that in terms of what ravens eat, they're very much like scavengers. They'll kind of eat anything and take what they can get, which I feel like is sort of like in line with the energy of the fall season, since everything is dying and there's a certain amount of scarcity to that. So I thought it was fitting that this is a bird that can still thrive in the environment of the autumn season. In terms of personality for this character, like I said, she's a little bookish and nerdy and quiet and macabre, but I also think there would be a certain level of quirkiness and chaos to this character, because again, I think that autumn is a fairly chaotic season whenever you think about it. I don't know why this is the imagery that I have in my head, but I feel like this character's energy would be a cross between Miss Frizzle and Mole from Disney's Atlantis: The Lost Empire. Catch her in the cemetery taking dirt samples and preserving deer bones that she finds strewn around in the forest. Spring cannot even remotely begin to understand her. I feel like that could actually be a cute bond that could emerge. Like, they're foils, but they're not like enemy foils. They just, complementary opposite traits. Since one of Spring's main character traits is that she's very curious, she wants to learn things, she would just be fascinated by, like, why? And I think that would be the door for them finding some common ground. Spring definitely has a weak stomach though. I don't know how well she would fare with the deer bones. And last up, we of course have winter, which is currently the season that I have the most complicated relationship with because I get really cold really easily. Winter is of course associated with snow and ice and very cold temperatures. It's associated with bare trees, evergreens and firs, pine cones and holly, and a general lack of live foliage. It's also associated with a bunch of different holiday seasons and feasts, because if it's going to be snowy or wet or cold and just generally miserable, you might as well eat a bunch of food and try to be as happy as you can. And for many animals that don't feel like being awake during this dark and cold time, it is also associated with sleepiness and hibernation. So unfortunately, since I think winter is probably my least favorite season right now, just because it is so cold and it is so rainy and wet and just sort of miserable here in the wintertime, I did struggle a little bit with this character design just because I have a little bit less enthusiasm for winter versus seasons like summer or fall, which I'm like a little bit obsessed with in general. But the winter does have some immaculate, incredible aesthetics. I do love snow. I don't currently live in a place where it snows in the wintertime, which is one of the things that I'm bitter about, but I do love snow. I love the layering of heavy cozy garments garments, and the Yule vibes are also absolutely immaculate, and that's a big part of what ended up driving this character design. So the character that I imagine for winter is sort of like a mysterious, sleepy, cozy girl. I did want the character designs in this video to get a little bit more dark and whimsical as the seasons go on, to the point where fall is getting like a little chaotic and mysterious, but winter even more so. Whenever I was coming up with this design, I was kind of thinking about what would the figure be like that kind of guards and surveys the forest while the rest of it is asleep in hibernation. This is the character that you would stumble across in the woods in the middle of the night and not know quite what to make of her at first. In terms of visual design, I wanted her silhouette to read as very triangular, almost as if you could mistake her for a snow-covered fir tree from far away, and then you get closer and realize, oh, that's a person. I also wanted her to be absolutely piled in layers of furs and like fluffy textures and things, almost as if she laid down on anywhere on the ground, not only could she just kind of curl up and go to sleep right there because she's so swaddled in warmth, but again, from far away, she would almost look like part of the snow-covered landscape. I basically wanted to make her sleep ready. She's wearing like our equivalent to one of those big bathrobes that doubles as a blanket that you can just curl up in. And it's a little difficult to see how I drew her, but that design also extends to her witch hat. Again, like the witch hat designs were a pretty iconic part of each design that I wanted to carry through, and I carried through that idea of the witch hat like getting even longer as the seasons progress. So winter's witch hat, like the tip, has grown long, almost all the way down to her ankles. And I did that because I wanted it to almost look like one of those silly Victorian sleeping caps that people would have on that are just so long. I suppose it's because you have your hair in there. I'm not entirely sure why it's that long. But again, I did that to get across the generally sleepy vibes. The brim of that hat is of course trimmed in snowy looking furs, and it matches an underdress that she has on that has like a bit of a medieval cut to it until you get to the bottom where it has more of like a swoopy mermaid cut, and the bottom of that is also trimmed with that same snowy looking furs. This gown also has super long bill sleeves that are trimmed the exact same way, and over top all of this is a giant fur trimmed cloak. It has a giant hood at the top that she could potentially put up over her hair and under her hat if she wanted to. This cloak has a little capelet over top, just like the very top of her torso, and then flows all the way down to the ground with heavy fur trim at the bottom. And this is something that I changed like a little later in the illustration, but on top of the capelet part, I also gave it a little snowflake embellishment just to add a little bit more detail. And also, since I was doing this mirroring thing with motifs throughout the season, Spring has flower embellishments on her capelet, so I thought it was only fitting that Winter should have snowflakes. For her staff, the base is kind of this white rickety birch tree because I very closely associate those with winter, and instead of a lantern at the top, I thought it would be cool if she had a collection of candles. I feel like they both work for the general winter festivities that are happening and also have a bit of a spooky vibe to them. And of course, decorating her staff at the bottom, I gave her a bunch of fir tree branches, pine cones, dead leaves, bits of holly, clumped up bits of snow, and I used those same embellishments in a couple of places on the hat just to balance out the design a little bit. I added some shoulder pieces to the outfit that are like giant dead leaves covered and iced over in snow with icicles coming off of them. And as another one of my patrons suggested, I added icicles as an embellishment in a bunch of other places on the costume just to add a little bit of like edge to the whole ensemble, because there is something quite sharp and threatening about the winter season. One of my favorite bits of this that I added was giant icicle earrings. I also added some fallen snowflakes around her eyebrows and on her eyelashes to make her look even more at one with the snowy landscape. And of course, for her familiar, I was at first going to give her a snowy owl, but even though that seems so very fitting, I'm pretty sure that I have done that exact thing in a character design video with a similar prompt before. So instead, this time I opted for a very large white wolf, which I just thought had the role of cool to it. In terms of personality, I have to admit this character was one of the more difficult difficult characters to come up with personality traits for, because I am trying to pull traits kind of directly from the seasons and then liken them to human emotions and personality traits and make something like gel. And some characters are just easier to do that with than others. But some of the general traits that I came up with were like this character being kind of an older sister figure to the rest of the group, since in terms of like the chronological order of the seasons, I think of Winter as being the oldest and coming last, so she perhaps has some of that wisdom and knowledge of like, my god, not the winter is coming of it all, but winter to be coming. Sorry, Hot D Season 2 just wrapped up and my Westeros brain rot is very strong right now. I'm not explaining this particularly well, but in terms of being, quote, the oldest, like Winter has been cooking for the longest. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it does in my brain. I think with the hibernation theme and the idea that creatures and living things kind of go to sleep for a little while and hide away, there's a protective role that she would play over the landscape in terms of making sure these creatures survive the winter, so I think that protective streak would maybe extend to the other stewards of the seasons. You get what I'm saying. Protective older sister vibes, wisdom, experience, cryptic phrases in a darkened forest while you sip a warm cup of cider. Of course, in terms of group dynamics, as the two later seasons that are associated with like sleep and death, winter and fall are like in cahoots and they speak each other's language. I think they both have a bit of a fascination with the macabre and the darkness because they don't see it as this like wholly negative thing. It's like a necessary step in the cycle of the seasons. And I think much like I said, spring looks up to the summer season a little bit, fall looks up to the winter season and admires her because fall's work feeds directly into this winter season. They have a bit of a symbiotic relationship. Okay, so finally, to rattle off just a couple of ideas that I kind of forgot about whenever I was recording the other sections. Of course, these characters would have general powers over the seasons and some of the elements associated with them, like weather, growth of foliage, well-being of animals, that sort of thing. But I think it would be cool if each of them had a niche of magic that they were particularly strong at. So for Spring, I was thinking that she could be particularly strong with like animal handling, animal whispering. I think Summer would have a bit of a poison ivy thing going on where she has the power of plant growth and kind of plant telekinesis. I think Fall is definitely a chemist and a potion master. Like she's whipping up some weird elixirs. I think she's also maybe a bit of a kitchen witch. She probably makes a mean apple pie. Although maybe don't ask what other than apples is in the pie. And then finally for Winter, I think it would be cool if she has like almost hypnosis abilities. Like she has the power to put you to sleep and then do some like crazy genjutsu on you and like torment you within your dreams or make you have very pleasant dreams. It's up to her. And this is partially based on my confession that sleep is one of the main spells that I use in D&D because I am sometimes not capable of doing anything else other than that. Also, finally, this video is gonna be so long. As a premise for this non-existent witch anime, I think it would be cool if at the very beginning these characters are all like at odds for each other. They're kind of like coming from opposite ends of the world because again, this functions like the Avatar cycle and you don't know like who it's gonna be or like what kind of person they're gonna be. And it's a bit of like a power vacuum. And you don't know if they're gonna get along, and it could be bad, but they're sort of forced to get along so that terrible things don't continue to happen and so that their own magic functions properly. Okay, alternate idea, they come from like rival magic schools. That could also be cool. Like maybe this ties in with the video that I made about the fairy professors. Maybe it's related to that in some way. Listen, if you're new here, you're in for something else. This is the biggest rabbit hole that I've ever created in my entire life. I don't know. I think it would be cool if it started out as a rival situation because conflict is a really fun way to flesh out character in this non-existent witch anime that isn't going to exist. Stop asking me to make an anime. I'm not gonna do it. That's a lot of work. Hello, and welcome to the end of the video. Why did I record every character for 10 minutes? Riddle me that. Anyways, you all keep insisting that you prefer the longer videos and you're okay with me rambling, so I hope you are once again okay with me rambling, because it only seems to be getting worse. I only seem to be recording for longer and longer whenever I make these videos. I hope you enjoy the finished designs and the process of everything. I think that this week I focused a little bit more on the actual like character design and visuals as opposed to some of like the personality and the lore and the background and all that stuff, just because I didn't have quite as much time this week as I've had on some of my like recent previous episodes. As of recording, I am leaving to go on vacation tomorrow, so kind of coming down to the wire whenever it comes to like getting this video done and out. But that's why I have you all, the audience, to speculate wildly and flesh out the lore in the comments below and essentially do my job for me. I'm kidding, only a little bit though, because you guys tend to have really awesome ideas. I especially love how connected you make like new character design videos with things that I've done in the past. Always love to see it, so as always, feel free to like expand upon the lore in the comments below. Give me some names so that I can stop saying the same name of seasons over and over again. It's making me lose my marbles. And also please do leave more suggestions for character design videos, especially for the fall and spooky seasons. I usually tend to do at least one of these videos every month because it is sort of like a whole undertaking to come up with new ideas and actually make them fleshed out and good. So I want to get some like real juicy, zesty ideas for the fall season. Anyways, that's it. I think these designs will be up for prints on my store if you would so like to have some ladies upon thine wall. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, especially for watching till the end of the video. But of course, as always, the biggest thank you for this video and every single one of my videos goes to my patrons and especially my executive producers. Ariana Trenta, Ink Moon Arts, Ember Creeps, Jaden Cypher, Cardia X, Christina Kimtia Art, Call Me Ash, Blaze Ravenscar, Lunira, Faith, Mossy Raven. I ran out of ideas for names. I'm not saying that name on the internet. ABW Makes, Sarah, Hopes and Crafts, Icecavan, Awendu, Liana, Ermler Jean, Anubix, Breeza, Sony, Brian, Phoenix, Rose Draconi, Freedom and Gus Gus, Kat, Dodo, Zyle S, Agent.Sketchy, Theamaia, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, Megan Penland, Enozine, India Gloom, Hypnos, Katie, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, and Bean the Bread.